Mike, let's just get to this. I mean, it has been an absolutely just crazy weekend. I know you and I were texting back and forth. You calling some of your friends over at the Republican National Committee. We've got a lot of our friends over at the convention. I ended up doing a bunch of interviews this weekend on Saturday and Sunday with news organizations, just trying to get a take on what was happening, the viewpoints from Republicans in California, viewpoint from Republicans over at the convention. And so, I mean, this is just absolutely surreal. You know, and I know, we speak for a lot of folks who, are happy that nothing serious happened, except for I know there's condolences and prayers to the families of the victim. That we've got one individual who passed away, and I think we've got two other individuals. I'm not sure if that's the correct
Yeah,
number, who
still in
are
the hospital.
in the hospital. Yeah, I mean, Mike, what's your take on this whole thing?
It's crazy. I mean, and it's you don't expect it. I think one of the things that's happened is we've gotten, I don't want to say complacent, but used to not having to worry about this stuff. I mean, during the '60s, it was pretty common. You had obviously JFK, then you had RFK, then you had Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and so it was almost commonplace. But since the shooting of President Reagan back in 1981, it's not been commonplace at all. And I think when people saw it, it was stunning and horrifying. And is it going to change anything? I don't know if it's going to change anything in terms of political attitudes and political temperature. But it certainly was one of those things that just leaves you stunned. There's many questions that leave me stunned, quite frankly, with how this whole thing was handled. But we'll see what happens when it all comes out. Just thank God that he moved and didn't get hit where the guy was aiming. And like you said, there's no reason why the person who was a former firefighter, father, great guy by everybody's definition, takes his family to a political rally. It shouldn't be where he doesn't come home from that.
Right.
There's something wrong when that happens.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's there's so many questions that are coming up, and mind you, we're just a day and a half after the event occurred, and there's questions on the Secret Service. Why didn't they secure that particular location? It looked, there's TMZ has this video that looks like the Secret Service had the individual, had
in
identified
the
the
sights.
individual in the sense of, yeah, the sniper had him set, and
Hmm.
but from there nothing happened. Until after the shots were fired. There is, there's questions, that there's video also of spectators, pointing up over at the place and saying, hey, there's a guy up there with a rifle. And so there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of investigation going on. We heard the president, and I think what's struck you and me as odd as we were talking this weekend is the president addressed the nation three different times, in a matter of 24 hours. And, you know,
I felt better.
well, it's, I thought him having addressed the nation was a right thing to do. I don't know if three
One,
times, but the third one, I mean, I understand his message of unity, his message of, we need this political rhetoric needs to come down. We're a unified nation. We're, politics, we can disagree. And at the same time, but we shouldn't get into this point of violence. And, this entire discussion, over words being said, over actions people are taking, it goes right back into this whole discussion, Mike, that we had about the January 6th and what that case is all about.
well, I mean, I think one of the things that was difficult to swallow, certainly as the president, when a former president is shot at, when a current candidate, leading candidate for president is shot at, that's major news, and the news media should treat it that way. First of all, the news media started out treating it like there was a commotion on some of the news media started treating there was a commotion on stage, and they escorted Trump off the stage. I mean, if that was Obama, if that was Biden, if that was anybody else, they wouldn't have done that. It would have been major news. The major news networks would have broke into their programming on a Saturday and covered it. They didn't do that. I mean, so is there a double standard? There's no doubt in my mind there is. Now, is the double standard extend to the protection and the dedication to the protection that was supposed to take place? We don't know yet. But, neither one of us are security experts, but, I do know that for a fact that you can't have a building like that. I mean, even what's his name, Mayorkas, head of Homeland Security, said today, you should never have a situation where there's a direct line of sight to the podium, unsecured. So clearly there was errors there. Clearly there was, when you look at that video you talked about, you see the snipers on top of the structure where the president was speaking, and they're not just there, they're aiming at something. They have their guns trained on something, and the president keeps talking and talking, and they're up there with their guns trained on something, and it wasn't until you see him grab his ear that they shoot their guns. So if they've got him in line of sight, why aren't they shooting? If they've got him in line of sight and nobody gives them the green light to shoot, why isn't anybody communicating to the agents that are around the president on the ground, get him out of there? I mean, those are questions that are going to have to be asked, and I think, I'm not a conspiracy guy. There are a lot of people that are conspiracy people. I'm not one of those. But it sure was a very strange situation to see all of that take place, and should not have taken place.
Well, and I think it's important for people to realize that, your expertise or lack of expertise or whatever, however you want to look at it, comes in. I mean, you were in charge of a national convention, a National Republican Convention that happened
2008.
in 2008, and so part of it is you were required to go out and purchase, or not purchase, but rent any type of buildings or facilities that had a view going down.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when we were in St. Paul, Minnesota, we were at the Excel Center, which is where the Minnesota Wild play, and there was a parking structure, 5-story parking structure, a good quarter mile, half mile away from the facility. But, the Secret Service, said that we had planned actually on using it for parking, because it's always a challenge. And the Secret Service came in and said, no, you can't use it for anything. In fact, you have to take ownership of that for, I don't know if it was like a week or something like that. And they had to sweep it once we took ownership of it. And then nothing could be put in there. And we had to pay tens of thousands of dollars to the owner to do that. And, you're talking about now a structure that faced a building, not even a podium where the candidate would be. And you had to do that. And you're talking about 2008, where you had John McCain, who is nowhere near the kind of polarizing figure Donald Trump was, and you had Barack Obama, who is nowhere near as polarizing a figure at the time as Joe Biden was, and a political atmosphere that was nowhere near as polarizing as it is today. And we had to do that. So to have a building like that has a line of sight, even though it's outside the secure perimeter. By the way, the secure perimeter is where people have to go through the magnetometers. But there's also an outer perimeter. Like when you go to the convention in Milwaukee, you have to go through an outer perimeter first, then you're inside the perimeter, and then you have to go through another set of security to get inside the building. So, it's just mind-boggling to have seen a building like that, And then when you see the stories, like you said, of, people seeing the guy up there, a local police officer climbing the ladder, and the guy points a gun at him, and the guy runs down the ladder. The snipers, the counter snipers, I guess they call them, above the president, aimed at something. They never moved. I mean, once you saw the president go to his ear, That's when you see they didn't move, they just started firing. So they had that guy in line of sight. There's going to be a lot of questions, and I think some heads are going to be rolling because of that. And they should. They should.
What about the rhetoric, Mike? The whole case on the January 6th came a discussion of the rhetoric that Donald Trump put forth that caused individuals to react, to
Right.
cause them to break into the Capitol and create all that damage and other items. I think there was and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a individual working there at the Capitol security who ended up passing away,
Mm-hmm.
or other people
Suffered a
were
heart
hurt.
attack. Yeah.
And so, and people have been convicted of this, but a lot of this whole January 6th or J6 was about Trump incited this insurrection, and thus he should be held liable for it. But when you look at this particular situation, I mean, you can go back and say, well, there was a lot of discussion that was happening, um, calling Donald Trump a threat to, I mean, several times a threat to democracy, a threat to this nation, Adolf Hitler. Um, you had Joe Biden 2 weeks ago, which the tweet was taken down this weekend after the assassination attempt. Saying that he needed to be put in a bullseye. There was a lot of this language, and so does it work both ways, or does it just work one way?
No, it just works one way. Yeah, it only works one way. And let's get to that point. You mentioned the president speaking 3 times in less than 24 hours. I think part of the thing that makes it laughable when he does that, you understand, he makes an address an address, and that's appropriate. But he keeps going back because he has a guilty conscience. It has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with him. He and his people being Kamala Harris, his people being Gavin Newsom, his people being Nancy Pelosi, his people being Chuck Schumer, his people being all of his campaign staff and surrogates and speakers, all have made this nothing about issues and policies, but have made everything about Donald Trump, the personality, and turned him, tried to turn him into the words actually they use is the existential threat to democracy. We will never have another election again. If he wins, he will be a dictator. All of this stuff. Well, it's almost like, Joe, we know you have a guilty conscience because you and your people have orchestrated that narrative over the course of the last 5 months. But, don't come and tell us to shut our mouth because we're not the ones running around saying all of this stuff. It's your people that have. It's you that have put in the campaign commercials out there. I think that's part of this, which is please don't be a hypocrite here. You're the president. You have a right to say this was wrong and everything else like that. But don't say you're going to unify the country. You're the one that said to people in Georgia who tried to pass election reform or who did pass election reform, you call them Jim Crow 2.0. You call them racist. You call them bigots. Kamala Harris called them racist. Kamala Harris called them bigots. It doesn't work. And to the J6 point, it's real simple now. If Donald Trump is responsible for the actions of those people because of what he said, then it's time to hold Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and everybody else in that group that did the exact same thing that caused this action to happen on Saturday. You can't have a double standard. It's got to be equally the same. So they have J6 was an issue that I think they had to talk about. I think they're going to have a lot more difficult time talking about it now. I want to know, for example, where's Liz Cheney's statement of denunciation of what happened on Saturday? Where's Adam Kinzinger's statement of what happened on Saturday? All of those people that were involved in the J6 committee, the guy who was the chairman of it from Mississippi, the House guy, he had to fire one of his staff people because who was a federal employee that you and I pay for, because she said, well, if you're going to shoot the guy, make sure you shoot straight. I mean, and they fired her butt, and they should have. But, all of that now changes because what happened was not a result of just, some angry guy. It was, you have the rhetoric that's going on, and they're saying tamper down the rhetoric. Before you tell me to tamper down the rhetoric, look in the mirror. That's what he needs to do.
Well, and I think, looking at it from just kind of a media perspective or political perspective is if you believe one thing to be true, then it's got to be true the other way around. And
Exactly.
so this is where they're going to have, I think they're going to have a difficulty in having this discussion on the J6, or utilizing that as a political hit on Donald Trump, because all they've got to do, the campaign, is just point out all the different things. And plus, the other thing too is, if you honestly believe, which is what they've said, that Donald Trump is the Adolf Hitler, and he will be the authoritarian and the dictator, and he is the worst thing that could ever happen to this country, then why do you wish him well? I mean, why do you wish him well? Why
Yeah.
do you say
Well,
your prayers and thoughts are with him,
yeah.
and wish him and his family well?
Yeah.
I mean, if this is truly what you
Good
believe,
point.
right? And so, it's one of these things where, look, I know you and I have been doing this for a very long time, and it is politics. It is all this discussion that people have back and forth, where they throw rocks at each other. But the thing is that if you're throwing rocks at someone, and then you get rocks thrown back at you, you can't go out and just and complain about it.
Right.
And so the whole J6 thing happens, and you blame it based on his rhetoric. It goes the other way around too. And so and that's from just what's going to happen with this particular issue, because it was a very powerful discussion, and ads were out there. They were a lot of use of this on the campaign trail.
There were. And by the way, that was the whole fundamental thing of the Biden campaign. The whole fundamental strategy of the Biden campaign is not to talk about issues, it's to talk about the evil Donald Trump and frame it in those ways, in those words.
Right.
And so, to then come back and say, oh, we got to tamper this down, again, start with yourself. Apologize for what you said. I, you know, I'd be more. I think Joe Biden would be more credible if he looked and said, he apologized for what he said. It'd be more credible if the media, when Donald Trump was shot, when Donald Trump was being held up by Secret Service agents with blood on his face and his ear shot off, part of his ear shot off, it would have been a lot more credible if they were just like horrified and shocked, as opposed to like, one of them saying, I think it was Jamie Gangel from CNN, well, he shouldn't be pumping his fist, he should be calling for unity right now. The guy just got shot. You can't help yourself. The guy's standing there bleeding, being held up by the Secret Service, and you're criticizing him. They can't help their. I can understand people disagree with his policy. I can understand people disagree with his personality. But these people hate him.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. These people, I don't, I disagree with Joe Biden. I disagree with Kamala Harris. I don't hate them. These people hate Donald Trump. And I think that's one of the things that I think people looked at and said, who are you kidding? When all of these people came out and said, oh, it's terrible and everything else and everything else. It's not believable because of all of the things you say about him that have nothing to do with what he believes and what his policies are, but everything to do with the person himself. And so I don't think it carries any weight with the American people whatsoever. And from a media standpoint, like you said, you can't have it both ways. And what took place was just so bad that I don't think they're going to be able to get away from that. I think that whole J6 thing is dead. I think they have to put it in a box, and now it's on to what happens. People now are saying, well, what happens next with Donald Trump? Well, I mean, we saw what happens next. He went back.
He
He went to
golfing the next day.
Yeah, he went back to Bedminster at the golf club in New Jersey and went golfing the next day. The question now is what happens to Joe Biden?
Well, no, I think the big question is, I think you got to ask the question, hey, George Clooney, hey, Barack Obama, hey, Nancy Pelosi, what next?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, that's right. The brain thrust.
the crazy part is, these individuals stuck their neck out on the line to say, hey, Joe Biden should be replaced. They stuck out their neck on the line to say not only should be replaced, but he's not all there. We need someone else. Now, this assassination attempt doesn't change Joe Biden's health or cognitive decline. It's
Hmm.
still there. If you did an op-ed in the New York Times and you went out there in public and said he should not be our nominee, we should get someone else, does this change that rhetoric? I mean, does it change, or are we going to hear crickets coming in from these individuals?
Oh, I think you'll hear crickets. I think
I
you'll
do
hear
too.
crickets
I
because they're stuck. I mean, they're stuck. What can you say? If you're George Clooney, if you're Barack Obama, George Clooney was doing it out front, but Barack Obama was doing it behind the scenes. Nancy Pelosi was doing it one way one day the next day. They're stuck
I know,
because
but
you're right.
Joe Biden exposed the Obama team. I mean,
He did.
Joe
He
Biden
did.
publicly exposed the Obama team on it, and but so he's there.
Right.
And so if they're stuck, I mean, are they not on the campaign trail? Are they not invited? Do they no longer get Christmas cards? What happens to them?
Well, before that ever happens, what happens to Joe? I mean,
Right.
I mean, because your point is well taken. The issue with Joe is not the policies. They love his policies because they're controlling. They're the ones that are controlling the people that are making the decisions that are making those policies. That's why they love the policy. The question is Joe himself. If he was unqualified and unfit to be president, as they said on Saturday at 5 p.m., he is just as unqualified and unfit to be president on Saturday at 5:30 p.m. after this guy tried to shoot President Trump. And so now the question becomes for them, how do you get out of this? How do you back off and say, well, he's the president, we've got to stick with him, when nothing related to him has changed whatsoever? I mean, even when you heard him last night giving his address from the Oval Office, I mean, and he's reading it,
Yeah.
and it's like, dude, I mean, practice,
Yeah.
practice before you read it. I
I,
mean, that's not that difficult,
I
but he
I
couldn't
honestly,
pull it off.
I honestly thought he was going to say "Make America Great Again." There was that little part where I thought, and I think, and he held himself. I I don't know. It just seemed as though he was about to say it.
Yeah, no, when he called him,
The
well,
battle.
at least he didn't call Trump his vice president. That was a step forward.
What was it, battle box? I think he battle a
Yeah,
battle box or something like that. He kept as opposed to ballot box. Yeah.
yeah. It's
And
he
I
hasn't changed. He has not changed.
no, it hasn't. I mean, look, I think the message was a good message of unity, of going down lowering down the temperature on this stuff, and so I think that in itself is good, or was good, and but you're right. I think everyone's kind of looking at each other right now. It's like, what's that cartoon where the Spider-Man's kind of pointed at each other? They got all these Spider-Man just pointed at each other. It's like, okay, so what are you going to do now? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Who's next? Who's sticking out their neck on the line?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that up until 5 o'clock on Saturday, there was this line. There's Joe Biden kind of feebly standing there, and then there's Kamala, and then there's Gavin, and then there's Gretchen Whitmer, and then there's J.D. Pritzker, and on and on and on the list goes. Sometimes it's Hillary, sometimes and what
Michelle.
have you, Michelle. So it's and now at 5:30, all of those people scatter because they just saw that if they end up being the Democrat nominee for president, they got to go against Donald Trump, who just somehow miraculously, by the grace of God, dodged a bullet, literally, and an assassination attempt. Good luck on that campaign. By the way, I was just going to notice that we know who's not going to be the VP, besides you and me. I was on the short list at Domino's. Burgum and Marco are out as
Okay.
VP potentials. So that kind of leaves JD and Tim Scott, and I think the other one that could be in it that people don't quite pay attention to because the president loves him a lot is Ben Carson.
Okay.
So we'll see. Maybe we'll know by the time our podcast is over. But
That's interesting you bring that up. They were supposed to have like this weekend, right? The announcement for the VP.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that all got changed around.
yeah.
So when does that announcement come in? Tonight? Tomorrow?
Sometime here on Monday.
Oh, so today. Okay.
Yeah, sometime here on Monday is supposed to come out.
Okay. Well,
So I know JD is the one that Don Jr. really likes. Um, I don't know what some people wonder kind of what he brings to the ticket, but I mean, this ticket is Donald Trump, period, end of story.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I don't think it matters that much, but, I
But the
would,
other thing,
Mark,
the other thing
go
too is that you saw that this morning the Supreme Court, no, the court, not the Supreme Court, the court just
Florida.
basically said, hey, on your what's it on that investigation over the or the secret documents,
Right,
that thing's now just been kicked out.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they really should kick out the one that's in federal court that says um, that they're trying to hold him accountable on the January 6th thing. Because again, I mean, I think actually you might see that kicked out because if that's left to stand, some smart lawyer somewhere is going to come in and say, okay, if you're going to hold him accountable for that action, then we're going to file a lawsuit and ask that all of these people, if what they said about Donald Trump are held for that action.
Well,
Um,
they hold them liable then, for the family and everything else of the
right,
victims. Yeah.
right.
Right.
Civil liability as
Right.
well.
That's what I
Yeah,
mean. Yeah.
yeah, civil
Because
liability.
you've got to. It's not as what's it? I'm trying to find the right words, but the to prove the wrong, it's not
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
yeah,
Yeah,
reasonable doubt. Yeah.
yeah.
And
With
so
it, with the civil thing, it doesn't have to be a unanimous decision by the
right,
court, and that the degree of evidence, it has to be a preponderance of the evidence,
right,
not the infallibility of the evidence.
right.
So the threshold for conviction is much less.
Yeah.
It's sad that I know this much about this stuff.
Well, you sat in a grand jury for a while, didn't you? In
I did,
Southern California, right? Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
no, it's so I mean, so now we see what happens next in the campaign. By the way, there are so many pieces to this. There is the piece of what happened. That's one that I think is going to be very interesting. And again, not as one that's ever been a conspiracy theorist. The fact that those facts that we saw raise certain questions. And then there's going to be the questions about how does this change the campaign? There's going to be questions about what happens. Here's a great question we haven't talked about. How does, or if it does, change Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I mean, he that was a pretty close call. Um, and a lot of times those kinds of things will completely change people.
Do you think it changes them in the sense of he kind of moderates it down, or do you think you just
No.
gave him two Red Bulls and he's ready to go?
No, I think what it does is it does give him an opportunity um, to kind of bring people who may not like his style but like his policy into his corner. People who are turned off by the angry tweets or turned off about his style and his rhetoric, but like what he did for the country when he was president,
Yeah.
and don't like what's happened over the last 4 years. I think it does open the door for them to give him a second look, and him to get those people. And if he's able to do that, this thing is over. This thing is over.
I honestly, I mean, with that picture itself, with that from and I wish I remember the AP reporter, but the AP reporter, we'll put his name down in our comment section, or description. That image that reporter took of President Trump, with the American flag up on top, him all bloody, and him, with his fist raised up.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just an iconic picture there, And I think that in itself, I mean, I've already seen on social media people went out and got tattoos of it, and and it's only a matter of time when you see T-shirts and everything else with that.
Well, I'm sure if you went to Milwaukee, probably if it's not there today, it'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah,
You know, it's probably honestly, it's probably we call some of our friends there. It's probably there today. I
yeah,
wouldn't be surprised at all.
yeah. It's crazy, Mike. But it'll be interesting to see who the VP is, and as we see this progression of the Republican National Committee, and so we'll end up doing another podcast in between this time, to kind of talk about who the VP becomes, who is the VP, and give you a little bit more insights on there, and also on the happenings of the California, not the California, but the Republican National Convention. Um, and so we'll,
It will be the other part that will be iconic is when he walks into that venue. You're gonna it's gonna be like a Ben-Hur movie, honestly. And you're gonna hear I think you will hear a lot of chants of fight, fight, fight. I think you're going to see people, and what's going to happen is the left is going to go, oh, look, they're being, aggressive and nasty and all this other stuff. And again, I would just say, when you walk around demonizing a guy, telling people that he's a threat, existential threat to democracy, call him a Hitler, call him a dictator, and all of this stuff, shut your damn mouth, because you, you are the ones that kind of created this situation with that kind of rhetoric. Instead of saying his policies on taxes are wrong or his policies on the wall is wrong or whatever, their whole strategy is to go after him personally. So please don't you guys ever preach to anybody about what they should say or not say. But it'll be interesting to see. I think you're going to hear that fight, fight, fight quite a bit coming out of Milwaukee.
what do you
Along
think
with,
happens to poll? What do you think happens to polling? The polling?
I think he goes up. I do. I think, it's yeah. I think he goes up. Because I think what happens is you probably now have more people undecided than they were. I know last time we talked about people solidly entrenched on both sides. He does. I think he does have a window to get some of those people that were kind of in the middle. They like him. They like what he did. They like what he, with the economy. They like what happened to their, 401ks. They like the fact that we were strong in the world. They like the fact that there weren't open borders in the South, but they didn't like the attitude or the personality of it, which, by the way, is a New York personality. I mean, I know a ton of people from New York. That's the way they are, which is why the Red Sox hate the Yankees and vice versa. But, I think this opens the door to reach those people. And here's the thing, I think his people are smart enough to take advantage and know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a biggest difference between 2000 and 2004. That they know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
we'll see.
it's interesting times right now.
That was my phone. I should have checked and see if it was Donald calling to give me, saying I was the first draft pick in the 2024 election.
There you go. All right, Mike. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, take care.